Throughout history, certain events have shaped our world in ways that go far beyond their immediate impact. November 22nd, 1963. September 11th, 2001. March 2020. Each moment marked not just by tragedy, but by the questions that followed. The Warren Commission, the 9/11 Commission, emergency powers that became permanent. From Dallas to New York to global lockdowns, patterns emerge for those willing to look. The same institutions, the same responses, the same consolidation of power. Recent events continue this trajectory. Butler, Pennsylvania, Manhattan's streets, each incident followed by familiar narratives, familiar solutions. Meanwhile, in boardrooms from Davos to Bilderberg, the world's most powerful gather behind closed doors. Central banks coordinate policy. Intelligence agencies share resources. Global forums set agendas that nations follow. The World Economic Forum speaks of stakeholder capitalism. The Bilderberg Group meets in secrecy. Ancient orders maintain their influence. Some call it conspiracy, others call it coordination. But the connections are there, documented and undeniable. The question isn't whether these networks exist, it's whether we're brave enough to acknowledge their influence on the world we inhabit. The dots are there. We just have to be willing to connect them.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Today, I'm going to talk about how our realities and our choices are being manipulated. We're going to talk about fifth-generation warfare. I'm also going to discuss controlled opposition, which is something I've talked about before. The idea is, in warfare terms, things have shifted over the decades from kinetic wars to information wars, utilizing technology, especially now with social media being so widespread. So how are they utilizing that? Speaking about the power structure, of course, I often refer to it as the Matrix, this sort of illusion that we're living under. And the idea revolves around fifth generation warfare, how the power structure is utilizing fifth generation warfare to manipulate our realities and control us, essentially. So let's get into it. We're going to talk about the idea of fifth generation warfare. What is fifth generation warfare? A shift from physical battlefields to narrative, mind, systems, and control. Warfare beyond armies focused on information and perception. Battles fought in minds and systems, not just on land. Control of narratives and environments defines power. So basically, if you think about the technology that's available, especially now, considering how widespread AI is in every aspect, you know, if you place an order online, if there's a problem with the order, when you reach out to customer service, what happens? You end up getting an AI system. You never can get a person on the phone. It's very rare now. It's becoming almost impossible to get somebody on the phone. right? So think about the idea. So let's pull that off and we'll go here. So narrative control and influence operations. Control the narrative, control reality, social engineering at scale, manipulation of information, and psychological warfare. If you control what people think, you do not have to force them to do anything. Now, I've talked a lot about controlled opposition and limited hangouts and how we see that in all the narratives that are pushed, both with social media influencers, bots, the mainstream media, in the corporate world, in politics. For all the true crime nerds out there regarding, let's say, for example, the Idaho 4 case, the Tyler Robinson trial, the Luigi Mangione trial that will be coming up. I don't believe that trial started yet. And then even with the Nancy Guthrie case, if you look at how information is presented to the public. So let's talk about the Idaho 4 case really quick. Recently, Cy Ray, who was the defense's expert relating to, he was basically the guy who created this company for cell phone data analysis, and he sold the company, but he was going to be an expert for the defense. And everybody had talked about how he was suggesting that based on the cell phone data, that there's no way that Bryan Kohberger could have been the one responsible based on cell phone data. And then, so everybody was like, oh, wait till Cy Ray comes out with his bombshell information when the gag order is lifted and so on. And then he recently did an interview on the Custody Queens Off the Clock with Ron channel. And he essentially reversed the narrative that was at least suggested to us before, and said that, oh, he believes there's no question that Bryan Kohberger was guilty based on the information. And then he shifts his narrative around. This is sort of what I'm talking about with controlled opposition, because what they do, they've released quote unquote experts. So you have the Broken Plea book by Christopher Whitcomb. You have Dr. Brent Turvey, who is a forensics expert. And then Chris Holland, who was also, he's former law enforcement and, an expert on investigations. And they all, in their own way, shifted the narrative and created some conflicting and opposing narratives. So that is kind of what I'm talking about with the idea of controlled opposition and how narratives get shifting. They get shifted, rather. So let's go here. The tools of fifth generation warfare: data collection and mass surveillance, bot networks and automated influence, financial leverage and market manipulation, psychological operations, and digital persuasion. Now, one of the things that I have spoken about is the way they create competing narratives, opposing narratives. For example, I mean, there are many examples. I'll go back to the pandemic. So you have wet market origins, then lab leak. I believe that those are two controlled narratives that are designed to oppose each other and keep people focused on those two narratives, those two opposing narratives, which ultimately steer the public towards what they want you to believe. They just appear as if they're competing narratives. Another example, Epstein killed himself. The other official slash official narrative is he was murdered. So those are the two competing narratives. The other more plausible narrative, in my opinion, is that he was taken out of prison or of jail, awaiting trial. He was removed. There are many other scenarios that you could bring to mind. Now, I gave the Idaho 4 case as an example. I think we will ultimately see it in the Tyler Robinson case, and I think we'll see it with Luigi Mangione. They want to push some type of agenda, and in many cases, I believe it is the domestic surveillance agenda. So you have to pay attention to what happens as a result of these high-profile events. So let's talk about the next one. So the battlefield is everywhere. There is no front line, only influence. Politics, education, religion, and culture. Corporations, markets, and NGOs. Activities and organizations that shape public opinion. Total control of the environment in which people think, decide, and act. So how does that, if you think about it, how does that play out in real time, in everyday life? You have these unpopular foreign wars. You're constantly bombarded with information designed to distract you and confuse you. No more foreign wars. Then I never said no more foreign wars. They shift narratives. Oftentimes, and I've spoken about this recently, it's not only about presenting a specific narrative. Oftentimes, it's to confuse and distract the public. That is part of what psychological operations do. In some cases, they want to manipulate how you think, how you spend your money, social behaviors, and opinions. But they also want to confuse and distract people. Now, you'll notice, I'm sure most people have noticed this, dividing groups is a big part of what psychological operations do, because a divided population is much easier to control. So recognize them, resist them, and reclaim your mental freedom and your freedom of choice. Question everything and verify sources. Protect your mind and build real connections. Support independent media and free speech. Demand transparency and accountability. So think about it. I always discuss how I think the first steps are to awaken to what is going on. You are capable of doing your own research. You don't need permission to do it. Now, be aware. Oftentimes, when you seek out information, some of it is planted to appear as counter to the official narrative. But you have to watch. This is part of controlled opposition, how that information or that person or that institution try to appear as opposition so they gain your trust. And then if you can develop this over time. If you're very aware, you can see how they subtly and strategically start to steer you. And they use these sources of controlled opposition because if people like a source of information, a content creator, a media personality, or a source of information, a platform that they like to use, then they will be less likely to question it and oppose that person or source. So that's part of how they shift it. So you have to protect your mind and build real connections. That's what I talk about, building a community where you can openly discuss and debate ideas. Now, regarding question everything and verify sources, I've bought certain books about a topic. Let's just say secret societies. Remember, there are going to be sources of information that are actually designed to steer you away from certain pieces of information and certain ideas. You have to pay attention. And I've gotten very good at identifying that. And I've made the mistake. I've bought books and then I start reading them. And then I realize, oh, they're steering me away from certain narratives. In fact, it just happened. I just got a book. It's supposed to be for like web sleuths that investigate global crimes. And it's called We Are Bellingcat. And then as I started skimming through different chapters, I started to see that they're trying to discredit other alternative theories and ideas about certain things. In my opinion, a good faith source of information does not try to steer the way that you think. So obviously support independent media and free speech. Any platform that's trying to censor should be questioned and, in my opinion, be very suspicious to people. Demand transparency and accountability. How many times have we seen content creators and media sources that will present information, and then when that information gets disproven, they never go back and address it. They just leave it floating out there. That's, in my opinion, a red flag. So we're going to just go through these and then we'll discuss a little bit more. The 5 domains of 5th generation warfare: information, cyber, economic, social, and cognitive. So with information, control the flow of information and shape perception. With cyber, attack, exploit, and control digital systems and networks. We've seen this with social media. Economic, weaponize markets, resources, and financial systems. We've seen evidence of market manipulation, monopolies that don't get investigated. We know there's certain banking institutions, large investment banks that basically have monopolies, but they use loopholes to get around that. Social, exploit divisions, right? Divide and conquer, identify and cultural fault lines. I don't like the way that's worded, but so they create a division. And oftentimes, I just did a video about Animal Farm, and the overarching idea is how systems get manipulated and co-opted to steer people towards things that are not in their best interest. And in Animal Farm, it's how they sort of this communist idea that gets manipulated and turned into totalitarianism. So if you pay attention, you can always identify these things. Okay, the operational model: observe, orient, decide, act. So with observed, you collect data and monitor behavior. So they are taking the temperature of the public through the online resources and through data harvesting and metadata analysis. Orient, analyze and identify fault lines. So this is how, by them being able to control the information, they can shift people with information. Decide, design campaigns and select levers. So they decide what they believe will be the most effective to control the public with information. Act, they deploy operations across domains. That's what we were talking about initially in the beginning of the video, where they use social media, they use politics, they use NGOs, they use business, and they decide which will be the most effective. And they always use multiple sources, multiple methods. So finally, the end game is a new world order, right? We've all heard about this. Organizations like the World Economic Forum, they speak openly, publicly stated goals and agendas have been widely available to the public. They want a surveillance state where nobody has real privacy. They total control. Choices are engineered. If you give people false choices where they are telling you or presenting information as if these are your only choices, many people get steered away from, well, why does it have to be one of those choices? We should be able to decide for ourselves. Total dependence, control over essentials, food production, information, where you get your information from. What is the accepted, what is the Overton window of acceptable ideas? They present it as if this is the only choice or these are the only choices. They do this with what music you can have access to, what movies you have access to, what politicians you have to choose from, what financial institutions are available to you. They do it with everything. And total obedience, the population polices itself. They utilize the divide and conquer methodology to get people to be essentially policing each other. It happened during the pandemic, or did I say plandemic? I meant pandemic, of course. Of course, it wasn't a plandemic. Resist today or obey tomorrow. The future is being written now. So let's think about this. We know these technologies are being used. No one will dispute that. AI is basically permeating every aspect of our lives, from content we consume to how we shop, to the information that we get exposed to on social media with bots and AI videos that are everywhere. And they basically are convincing people that, oh, don't trust your lying eyes. Don't use your own critical thinking. You have to depend on us because there's so much misinformation and disinformation out there. Many people fall for it. The controlling of narratives is a big, significant part of how fifth generation warfare operates. If you present certain narratives as if they're the only choices, many people will not look further. And we can't allow them to have that much control, because if we do, then ultimately they're steering us, they're manipulating us, and they're doing it to gain more control and power. And if they can control where people get information, where people spend their money, who people vote on in politics, which I think is all theater personally, because they're all controlled, in my opinion. But remember, right versus left, two opposing narratives that are both controlled opposition. It's everywhere. Pay attention to it. Many of these large content creators are sponsored. Now, they could be corporate sponsored, they could be state sponsored. Think about the technology we have access to. What the power structure has access to is decades ahead of what we have access to. The financial stuff is a major component because we are supposed to have a free market. But if these large investment banks own basically every major aspect of our lives when it comes to food, information, large corporations, big pharma, big tech, the military industrial complex, all these different avenues that we interact with in some way, shape, or form, or that impact our lives in a profound way, they have control over all of that, which is, I mean, it should be illegal. It should be criminal. Collusion with foreign nations for these larger agendas that do not serve the public's interest. So awareness is the key. And people often ask me, well, how do we stop it? What do we do? Well, awareness is the first step. Being aware of your choices and little steps we can all take. And I want to do a live stream soon where we discuss, because people ask me all the time. I'm not trying to avoid it. I try to tell people you have to think about it, how you can do small things, because if you do small things, it empowers you. But I will talk about some, if people want, I will address small steps that people can take in order to start doing something about it. But spreading awareness and paradigm shifts are the first step, and they're powerful. It's just that most people think, I've talked about this, the bystander effect. On a large scale, people think, well, these things are so bad. How come nobody's doing anything about it? There has to be people in our government. There has to be wealthy people that are decent, that are doing something about it. There has to be people pushing back. There's got to be groups that are pushing back against this. That's a manifestation of the bystander effect on a large scale. So you can't assume other people are doing something about it. And the paradigm shifts and the awakenings and the tipping points that happen tend to spread fast once they start happening. It starts with ideas and awareness. So now, I mean, ultimately, we have to be aware. We have to be aware of what it is, how it is used. Within the next few days, I will post these images on the State of the Deep Discord. Please join the Discord. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps grow the community. Share the information, share the videos if you like them. You know, spread the word. But I will post this stuff, these images, onto the Discord, and you know, people can either share them, or you know, if you want to just have them to review them, you can. And you can do your own research on this stuff. Again, this is just a overview of the information. You can look into more specifics about the NGOs that are used, and specifics about what intelligence agencies are doing, and specifics about these organizations like the World Economic Forum and how they have their openly stated goals. I did a video about the Great Reset, which is one of their larger agendas that, in my opinion, is in fact playing out today. So with that, I'm going to leave it at that, and do your own research, dig deeper, be aware of these things and how they're being used. In the future, I'm going to do more specific topic deep dives. It's just some of them are more detail oriented and require more research and more consolidation of information, because there's so much information out there. So I don't want to half-ass it. So I'm going to be doing stuff on geoengineering in the future. I'm going to be doing more specific videos that get into intelligence agency operations and declassified information and things like that. So keep your eyes open for that stuff. And planning to do a live stream this Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to try to drop another pre-recorded video on Wednesday as well. Probably I'll either drop it in the morning or at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you're interested, please subscribe and pay attention and join the Discord. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. Stay aware out there. See you soon.